So Gracelle, I will turn it to you so you can call upon the three facilitators and give your closing.
Thank you. It's been such a pleasure, Nalini, to do this with you, and I hope we can do many more. In fact, we wish we had another 15 minutes in the group to even talk about a little bit. So many key things came up, but so let's just recap. Firstly, thank you to all the facilitators for your input and your valuable time. Welcome back. I'd like to just call on each facilitator to just give a short version and maybe a quick recap of what were some of the key discussions, and then we can go into the latter part of the discussion. Can I ask who was the first facilitator? I can't see on the group. Anil, were you a facilitator?
So we have Mrs. Felius up first.
Okay, please.
Thanks. Of course. Wow, my group was wonderful. It's such a variety of cultures represented: Pakistan, India, Canada, Venezuela, America, the New York view. The first thing that was brought up was the idea that, this is from me personally as well, that COVID has kind of shut me down. And so I don't watch the news to be told how bad things are. And it's not that I live in a bubble and I say, oh, I'm okay, therefore everybody else is okay. No, I live that way, and I'm very, very sad about the spread of the virus in other countries. And it's still here in our country, and it's just a reminder that it has not gone away. So I think that's a really good point. That things like with Ariana was an interior decorator, and the beauty of Indian goods and the cultural connection to that, and the awareness that there is that beauty. And there's also the many people who cannot help themselves in what's being done. A couple of people in our group had suggestions. That was that when we have these meetings, that we have suggestions of places where we can donate and where it's safe to donate. And so this group has two places: one, Save the Children, and the other one, Doctors Without Borders. And one person in the group has grandnephews who are going to work, who are going with Doctors Without Borders to, I believe, to India. But those are two very well-known and good organizations. And the other idea is that, of course, all of this is making us very aware of the negative aspects of life. What I find is that that seems to dominate everything, but to look at the toxins as coming to the surface, and that what the those who care and those who are good, which I think the majority of people, what we're going to do about it and how we're going to do something about that. But I think we came up with some really positive ways of dealing with a difficult situation. I mentioned Rotary. Rotary is still trying to eliminate polio, and that's very positive, and it's almost eliminated. Now that's since 1980. And India was one of the countries where polio was just running rampant, and now it's down to maybe 3 cases in the world. So things are happening with good humanitarian groups, a lot of people who care. I'm with a lot of teenagers in high school who really do show that they care during this pandemic, because they've had a very difficult time just in education and contact with people. So maybe that's what will happen. It will lead to a more positive actions on the part of people. Thank you.
Professor Asif Ahmed.
Yes, thank you.
Hi, have I unmuted myself?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. It was a very interesting group. my group, unlike being multinational, multi-bordered, it was US and Europe. Europe, I mean the islands of islands, and UK. So, but it was very, the people, Stephen, Dr. Rao, AJ, Bernie, and Christy were the people in my group. And we both, all of us, had huge empathy. We spent quite a lot of time on the empathy question. Things like Stephen said, we're global citizen. He saw himself as a global citizen. No words to describe it, what's happening. World is a small village. I really like that. Can't ignore it. And then Dr. Rao was talking about that it's been really mismanaged from the beginning. And the flare up is in India, but it could go around the world. And so it's something we need to be, it's not vaccine, but vaccination saves lives, you know. And AJ was talking about that he got the information from the news and Clubhouse and the spike, and wants to know what he can do to help. Bernie was talking about shocking, but what she said was really interesting, that India is such a huge population, 1.3 or 1.7, 1.4 billion people. So 1.3, isn't it? So 1.3 or 4 billion, maybe I can't remember, for 1.4 billion people. But think of it this way, that the whole entire population of Ireland has to be vaccinated in a weekend. That's the challenge. And so that, and I think that really brought her home to it. Then we moved to on action. What can we do? One of the things everyone was talking about, yes, oxygen is being produced, but it's not being transported. So transportation is, even though the government says there is a green channel for moving oxygen, but it's not actually working. So I put forward an action that was that, you know, creating, not focusing on the big cities like Delhi and Bombay, but the tertiary work, because 70% of India lives in the rural heartland, if you like. And therefore, you know, smaller towns where hospitals are, who are doing things, if we can put oxygen plants in sight of hospitals. And I've started that already as a, or to do that for one specific, so like you build a house one brick at a time. So let's start thinking of building one plant at a time, one hospital at a time, that as long as we know that this hospital is valid and is verified, or all of those things, we can do that. And I've been doing that in the back channel with outside Clubhouse, and I've already got quotes and things like that I'm trying to work through. We worked both for German company and in India. And I've decided now that in India is the way to do it, because you'll get stopped at customs and things won't happen and all of those reasons. So and I'd like this group to think if they could be part of that, and then we can build that momentum around that. And Dr. Swati Agarwal, who's a colleague of mine, who is based in Toronto, but she worked at this hospital for 5 years. And for declaration, the hospital belongs to her parents. And it has a 150 bed, which is private, and 100 bed, another hospital, which is for not for profit. So it will benefit everyone, but we can have a system that the oxygen, no one gets charged for oxygen. So those kind of things, even not now, but even later. And this will then build the infrastructure for future. So we could do this on a scale going forward, because this will happen again, maybe 10 years from now. So those were the action points we came to. I hope if I've missed anything, maybe others can chime in and correct me.
Thank you, Professor Nassif. Dr. Clifton?
Francis, do you take that, please?
Yes. Okay, I just had trouble getting the mute off. It was wonderful hearing about the other two groups. And I think our group, I think all three groups were really started and ended with empathy. And they were, the first two groups talked about, you know, sort of macro projects that are like indispensable to deal with the suffering of the world right now. And our group was sort of putting more of an emphasis on a micro aspect. And we all shared, you know, the guiding question was how do we develop empathy within ourselves? And through a joint effort, we all, you know, came up, and Gracielle and Sonia and several others, we saw that, you know, empathy had these kind of three components that would be, you know, because it's not automatically given, you know, it's kind of learned in our sharedness with common humanity. And so one of the first practices was, you know, learning about it, talking about it. And then another would be setting up empathetic practices. And Gabrielle in Delhi was talking about what can we do? She's surrounded by illness and fear, not her, I mean everyone. But they developed a check-in group where every morning they check in with the residents within a certain diameter, and you know, and they're seeing the commonness of needs they all have, and they talk about it, and people are expecting, you know, to hear from other people, and you know, and they're you know, it revives that their life matters. And then another practice that they developed, she developed, was there's a huge delay in online ordering. So normally before the latest COVID development in India, you could get your deliveries within a day. Now it's 5 or 6 days. So what she developed was she would make huge orders and it would come 6 days, but it wouldn't just be for her. She would deliver them to different people in the towers around her, you know. So that's a practice of empathy. Another practice was we talked about was asking for help ourselves, thus, you know, transcending, you know, our ego, that we're above it all, that, you know, that we all need help at various times. And so then we concluded that all these things of practicing empathy was actually the profound practice of being human and embracing our humanness. That's true of every country in the world. You know, we all are born, grow up, suffer, have joys, and our loved ones die. You know, and that we share that. And then, you know, and then part of the other empathy that we all shared and talked about is, you know, we have to work on facing the fear of our humanness, because it comes with suffering and it comes with joy, and sometimes we'll be overly defensive and afraid of it, and not stepping into the pool of pain or suffering. I mean, empathy comes from pathos, which is, you know, embracing the suffering of another, and the more we do that, the more we can see the face of ourselves. So I think it was, you know, profoundly moving for all of us, certainly for me, where people were coming up with practices to increase empathy, embrace our humanity, and thus that, and then all of the macro things that the other groups talked about, I think that's the underpinning that they have in their hearts is, you know, that these larger efforts, you know, but if we don't have the empathy and compassion, we're not, you know, we're not going to grow in our humanity. So it was a huge pleasure, and thank everyone for sharing. Okay.
Do we have one more facilitator, or is that it, Nalini?
No, I think that.
Okay, so just in closing, just a perspective, just thank you, Marie and Asif and Francis. It was really wonderful to be in these breakout sessions, but also to hear that we are actually all in agreement, no matter in what corner of the world we find ourselves. You know, that sense of isolation and the loss of hope and despair we see around us, and how we also have to make sure that we know how to become more empathetic. And I must say that Sonia had an amazing perspective, and Francis as well, is that empathy is a learned behavior. It doesn't always come naturally. So we tend to isolate sometimes before we actually step into the breach to help someone. And I think we've all quickly had to learn that lesson right here while we were at the coalface. So I found that there was a lot of commonalities in the discussions, and however, there's been really great practical ideas like what Marie was talking about, the list of the companies and the organizations to connect with. And Nalini, I got a message that we will circulate that within today still. So I'm not going to go through that in detail, but something I wanted to just add with regards to what Professor Asif had said is it has to be sustainable. This is going to continue. And the help that we are getting and the support from groups like this, I absolutely agree, is to work with people that are on the ground, that can make things happen. Instead of going through the bureaucracy, we've seen wonderful commitments from all over the world, but still today we had the highest infection rate. Looking back over the entire April, we are on 415K. So that means that the help isn't getting to where it needs to be, but that shouldn't be a barrier. It should be an opportunity. Work with people that are here, that are open to getting. I'm more than happy. I have resources, I have connections, I have networks. I work with hospitals. I've worked with Rotary International also for almost a decade. So here on the ground, please feel free to reach out. And if there are some ideas or connections, we will make it happen. But I think people need the empathy, and something Sonia and we were also mentioning is maybe we should do more of these sessions and focus on Empathy 101. How do we actually step into a learned behavior of being empathetic? In this week on Clubhouse, somehow, I can't remember who it was, but we spoke about the brain and the connection between how do you tame your brain? And that was that we need, the more we give, and it's a universal thing, the more we give, the more we receive. But the more we're in a position today is that it's actually for our own well-being to be giving, because it makes you feel that meaningfulness. So one other practical example is, other than lobbying, people in government to continue to help and focus on India, I find that the American Chamber in India, the various American chambers are actually becoming very active. So you could also work directly with them. Or if you need a conduit into the American Chamber, the American School is doing a lot of work. And also, again, I agree with us, if it's not just Delhi. If you look what's happening in Ahmedabad or Salavas or in Rajasthan, smaller villages are really, really suffering. And the burden is a lot on women. So anyway, I know that I don't have a lot of time for the wrap up, but I do want to say that there's so much more. And to bring a little back of my African heritage, you must have all have heard probably about the saying that came from Bishop Tutu was Ubuntu. I am because we are. And the more we remember that, the more Tagore also said the same thing. So let's think of more practical ways. And I think that all our DMs are open, our mobiles are on. Let's get moving and get some more practical ideas. And I think we have time, we're in isolation, and we're more and open to get things off the ground. And thank you once again. I'd like to hand back to Nalini. If there's anything else I missed out, please just let me know. Okay.
Thank you so much, Gracelle.